Society sells you a toxic lie. It tells you that if you care deeply about your future, your relationships, or your career, you must worry about them constantly. It convinces you that anxiety is somehow a substitute for preparation, that if you relentlessly run through every worst-case scenario in your mind, you are actively protecting yourself from failure. The uncomfortable reality is completely the opposite. Worry is not a shield. It is a psychological cage. It does not prevent bad things from happening. It simply paralyzes your ability to handle them when they do. We worry because human beings are deeply addicted to the illusion of control. We think that by gripping the steering wheel of life so tightly our knuckles turn white, we can somehow steer clear of chaos and unpredictability. But true psychological power, true stoic mastery, begins the exact second you realize that control is an illusion. You cannot control the global economy, the shifting opinions of your peers, or the inevitable betrayals and storms of life. What you can control is your internal posture. When you stop worrying, you are not giving up. You are surrendering the illusion of control in order to gain actual clarity. You must understand the silent psychological signals you are sending out every single day. Before you even utter a single word, you are broadcasting your internal state to everyone around you. Human beings are deeply primal, intuitive creatures. We are biologically wired to detect anxiety, desperation, and fear in others. It is in the micro-expressions of your face, the shallowness of your breath, the frantic, rushed energy in your steps, and the rigid tension in your shoulders. When you operate from a baseline of chronic worry, you leak weakness into the room. People unconsciously lose respect for you. They hesitate to trust you because your biology is screaming that you do not even trust yourself. Leadership, at its core, is the projection of safety and competence. You cannot project safety if your internal operating system is infected with fear. Now, compare that to the person who walks into a room completely detached from the outcome. They are calm. Their movements are deliberate and unhurried. They are not frantically scanning the environment for threats. They are simply observing. This is the ultimate signal of authority. When you stop worrying, you stop radiating needy, desperate energy. You suddenly become a gravitational pull. People are subconsciously drawn to stillness. In a world full of panicked, reactive individuals, the person who remains entirely unbothered becomes the one everyone else looks to for direction. This is the core philosophy of why everything falls into place the moment you let go. The moment you stop worrying, you create a psychological vacuum. You stop forcing outcomes. You stop trying to manipulate people and situations to fit a rigid, fearful narrative in your head. And in that empty space, that quiet vacuum of detachment, reality begins to organize itself. Opportunities that you were completely blind to, because your vision was clouded by anxiety, suddenly become obvious. You stop playing defense and start playing the long game. You transition from the mentality of a pawn, constantly reacting to the movements on the board, to the mentality of the grandmaster. You must recognize that the energy you spend agonizing over tomorrow is the exact energy required to conquer today. Worry drains your cognitive bandwidth. It leaves you exhausted before the battle even begins. The moment you release that grip, the moment you deeply accept that whatever comes, you are competent enough to handle it, that is the moment the fog clears. You stop chasing life, and life starts falling into place. Look at how chronic worry infects your daily communication. The anxious mind is a loud mind, and it inevitably spills over into how you interact with the world. When people are deeply worried about their status, their relationships, or how they are perceived by others, they commit one of the most fatal psychological errors. They over-explain. They talk constantly. They fill every uncomfortable pause with justifications, hoping that if they just use enough words, they can convince the other person to accept them, validate them, or love them. The uncomfortable reality is that over-explaining is a glaring broadcast of powerlessness. When you feel the constant need to justify your decisions, your preferences, or your boundaries, you are not communicating effectively. You are begging for permission to exist. You are implicitly telling the other person that they sit in the judge's chair, and you are desperately pleading your case from the floor. You are handing them the keys to your self-worth. In the subconscious hierarchy of human interaction, the person who speaks the most, who tries the hardest to be understood, is almost always the one holding the least authority. Now, compare that to the devastating psychological power of silence and restraint. History repeatedly shows that the most formidable figures, the true grandmasters of life, are notoriously frugal with their words. They do not feel the frantic urge to be understood by everyone. They do not worry about being misinterpreted by the masses because their validation does not come from external applause. It comes from an unbreakable, stoic, internal framework. When you stop worrying, you no longer feel the desperate need to manage everyone else's perception of you. You naturally start speaking less. There is immense, undeniable power in mystery. When you hold your tongue, you become a blank canvas. People do not know exactly what you are thinking, what you are planning, or how you will react. That uncertainty commands deep, instinctual respect. Human beings are profoundly intimidated by the unknown. By simply closing your mouth and maintaining a calm, unbothered posture, you force others to project their own thoughts, insecurities, and true intentions into the silence. Let the anxious people talk. Let the worried individuals fill the room with their verbal clutter. While they are busy over-explaining and seeking your approval, you must operate as a silent intelligence gatherer. You are watching their micro-expressions. You are listening to the subtle hesitations in their voice. You are mapping out their psychological framework. By remaining quiet and observant, you learn everything about their motives and weaknesses, while they learn absolutely nothing about you. This is the absolute essence of psychological leverage. The moment you let go of the agonizing worry over how you are perceived, a strange paradox occurs. The less you try to convince people of your worth, the more they inherently believe in it. Everything falls into place socially the exact moment you stop trying to force the puzzle pieces together with endless dialogue. You reclaim your right to be silent. You realize that your words have supreme value, and you stop discounting them by throwing them at anyone who will listen. You speak only when it serves a calculated purpose. And when you finally do speak, your words carry the weight of a hammer, because they are not diluted by a river of nervous chatter. Silence is the armor of the Stoic mind, and restraint is how you win the game before it even begins. When you are consumed by worry, you are perpetually terrified of loss. You worry about losing your partner, your friends, your job, or your social standing. And because you are paralyzed by this fear, you commit a critical error in how you manage your boundaries. You negotiate them. You use words to tell people how you want to be treated. You complain, you argue, you lay out ultimatums, and then, when they inevitably cross the line again, you do absolutely nothing. You stay because you are too worried about the void they would leave behind. The uncomfortable reality is that boundaries are not something you communicate with your mouth. Boundaries are something you communicate with your feet. People do not listen to declarations. They respond exclusively to consequences. Human beings are constantly probing their environment. They are subconsciously testing your limits, not usually with massive betrayals, but with subtle, calculated micro-transgressions. A slightly disrespectful joke in front of an audience, a canceled plan at the last minute, a condescending tone of voice. They are dropping a pebble into the water to see how big the ripple is. They want to know exactly what you will tolerate. If your response to these subtle disrespects is fueled by the anxiety of losing them, if you nervously laugh it off, or if you get visibly upset but remain in their presence, you have just established your baseline. You have taught them that your boundaries are purely decorative. Manipulators thrive on your anxiety. They use your fear of conflict as a weapon against you. They know that as long as you are worried about keeping the peace, they can wage a quiet, continuous war against your self-esteem. Now, compare that to the stoic, unbothered individual who has entirely relinquished the worry of abandonment. When this person encounters a pattern of disrespect, they do not engage in a heated debate. They do not draft a lengthy text message explaining their feelings, pleading for the other person to understand. They simply observe the behavior, process the data, and enact a calm, immediate consequence. They remove their attention. They walk away. Walking away is the single most devastating psychological weapon you can wield against someone who is testing your limits. It requires 0 words and delivers absolute, undeniable impact. It loudly broadcasts that you are completely detached from the outcome of the relationship if it requires you to compromise your self-respect. You are not worried about being alone because you are completely at peace in your own company. You are not worried about finding another opportunity because you are deeply anchored in your own competence and value. History repeatedly shows that people only respect what they cannot conquer. When you remove your presence without a single drop of emotional reactivity, you establish an ironclad perimeter around your life. You flip the psychological dynamic entirely. By stepping away from the chaos, you force the other person to face the stark reality of your absence. Suddenly, they are the ones worrying about losing you. This is the profound mechanism of how everything falls into place. By stopping the obsessive worry over keeping people in your life, you allow the cold, natural law of consequences to aggressively filter your circle. The parasites, the manipulators, and the boundary pushers will naturally fall away because they can no longer feed on your anxious tolerance. When you finally stop worrying about who is going to leave, you create the psychological space for the right people to stay. You stop trying to force respect, and instead, you construct an environment where disrespect is physically impossible to sustain. The anxious mind is fundamentally a reactive mind. When you operate in a state of perpetual worry, your ego is always on high alert, scanning the horizon for threats to your identity, your intelligence, or your reputation. Because you are terrified of being diminished, you become hypersensitive to criticism. You snap back, you defend yourself passionately, you get angry. The uncomfortable reality is that every time you react emotionally to a provocation, you are handing your opponent a remote control to your nervous system. You are showing them exactly where your buttons are and practically begging them to press them again. Emotional reactivity is the ultimate blood in the water for a manipulator. When they insult you, mock you, or subtly belittle you, they are not looking for a logical debate. They are hunting for a reaction. They want to see your pulse quicken. They want to watch your composure shatter, because in that moment of anger or defensiveness, they have successfully hijacked your mind. You are no longer acting on your own terms, you are dancing to their music. Now, compare that to the devastating psychological impact of absolute emotional mastery when you finally stop worrying about what others think of you, when you completely detach your self-worth from their fragile opinions, you neutralize their greatest weapon, you become untouchable. Imagine a scenario where someone delivers a thinly veiled insult or attempts to back you into a corner. Instead of snapping back, instead of flushing red with anger or rushing to defend your honor, you simply pause. You look at them with dead, unblinking eyes. You hold eye contact for 3 long, agonizing seconds. And then, you either change the subject entirely or give a brief, emotionless nod. That pause is a psychological earthquake. By refusing to react, you refuse to validate their attack. You leave their insult hanging in the dead air, exposed and pathetic. Human beings expect a reaction to aggression. It is written into our primal code. When you deny them that reaction, you break the script. You become entirely unpredictable. History repeatedly shows that the most terrifying opponents are never the loudest in the room. The loudest individuals are transparent. Their insecurities are broadcasted through their rage. The truly dangerous individuals are the ones who remain chillingly calm under fire. Their stillness makes them a black box. Because you do not show them what hurts you, they have no idea how to attack you. Because you do not display your anger, they have no idea when you will strike back. This is the essence of becoming impossible to manipulate. When everything falls into place, it is because you have stopped giving the world the ammunition to destroy you. You no longer worry about defending your ego, because your ego is no longer tied to their validation. You stand in the eye of the storm, perfectly serene, watching everyone else exhaust themselves trying to move an immovable object. You master your emotions, and in doing so, you master the board. When you operate from a place of chronic worry, your instinct is to overcompensate. You become a chronic people pleaser. You say yes to every invitation, every request, and every unreasonable demand on your time because you are terrified that if you say no, you will be forgotten, disliked, or replaced. You mistakenly believe that by being hyper-available, you are securing your position in the lives of others, in your career, or in your social circles. The uncomfortable reality is that in human psychology, constant availability is the exact equivalent of economic inflation. When a government prints too much money, the currency loses its value. When you give away your time, your presence, and your energy without hesitation, you drastically lower your perceived worth. People simply do not respect what is given freely. They do not cherish what they never have to work for. By desperately hovering, constantly checking in, and making yourself relentlessly accessible out of deep-seated worry, you are unconsciously training the world to treat you like a cheap, expendable commodity. Now, compare that to the commanding presence of a person who has mastered the psychology of scarcity. When you finally sever the cord of worry, you naturally pull back. You stop forcing yourself into every room and every conversation. You begin to value your own time and your own solitude more than the fleeting validation of the crowd. This is where a profound psychological shift occurs in how others perceive you. By limiting your availability, you automatically create a deficit. Human beings are biologically wired to obsess over what is scarce. When your presence becomes a rare event, rather than a daily guarantee, people begin to anticipate it. They start to assign a premium to your attention. You transition from being taken for granted to being highly sought after. History repeatedly shows that true power is always cloaked in deliberate distance. The most influential figures are never the ones desperately seeking the spotlight. They are the ones who make the spotlight seek them. They understand that an undeniable reputation is not built on anxious, erratic attempts to please everyone. It is built on consistent, unyielding actions. When your behavior is grounded in stoic calm rather than frantic worry, you establish an impenetrable pattern. People quickly learn that you cannot be moved by panic. They learn that you cannot be bought with cheap flattery or manipulated by manufactured crises. Your reputation solidifies into something monolithic and unbreakable. This is the ultimate endgame. This is the precise reason why everything falls into place the exact moment you let go of the worry. You stop swimming desperately against the current of human nature and start leveraging it to your absolute advantage. The moment you stop worrying, you reclaim your energy, your mystery, and your ironclad boundaries. You force the world to interact with you entirely on your terms, not out of loud arrogance, but out of an unshakable, silent self-respect. Stop giving the world permission to exhaust you. Stop negotiating your value with people who cannot afford your worth. The game of life is not won by the person who worries the most, speaks the most, or panics the loudest. The game is won by the grandmaster who sits back, observes the board, and realizes that control was always an illusion, but self-mastery is absolute. Let them panic. Let them worry. You just master yourself, hold your silence, and watch as every single piece inevitably and perfectly falls into place.